Yeah, so as Hannah said, this talk is about designing UI for players. We're not going to talk about designing UI for robots. I don't know who else you design UI for, but here we are today. So yeah, I'm Ben. I'm the engineering manager for game experience. Somehow we got an engineer into the design track. Don't let anyone know, but I'm here. I know a little bit. Yeah, I've been at Roblox for a little over 9.5 years. And one of the jobs that Game Experience does is we do a lot of the work in the engine to bring features to the UI system. So we'll be talking a bit about that. When it comes to UI, there's a lot of topics to cover. This is about a 20-minute talk, so we're going to go kind of high level on a lot of these things, not everything, and then dive into some kind of specific examples, both in Roblox and other games in the industry. So high level, some layouts, and then at the end I'll talk about some new stuff we're working on that will come out sometime in the future. Okay, so UI design guidelines. There's a bunch of these. The first thing I'm going to start with, because we talk about this a lot, and I think it's super important, and I'll have some reasons why it's important later, is to start with mobile. There's other things we'll talk about, but this is just like something I want to get out in front of and talk about because I think it's super important. There's a lot of constraints with mobile. I have a couple different mobile games here, not on Roblox, but I think they're good examples of good UI design, at least in a screenshot. With mobile, we have a lot of size constraints. A lot of people are on phones or on tablets, both smaller generally than your PC screen. So you got to think about how much real estate you can devote to something that's 2D on the screen versus your 3D content. And the input is also a little more constrained as well. You have fingers versus keyboard and mouse, gamepad, which gives you a little bit more dexterity generally. So we'll go into more detail about that and how Roblox empowers you to build those things easily that work across mobile and also desktop a bit later in the talk. So a little bit higher level, kind of talking about what this topic is about is, thinking about what does your player care about when they're playing your game. There's a lot of different things you might be thinking about while designing your game, but what does your player see or want to do when they play your game? What's the use case? There's probably, lots of use cases for what your player might want to do at any given moment in your game. Is it collecting resources? Are they trying to shoot someone else? There's like a billion different things. Are they managing their inventory? All of these have implications for your UI design and what you might want to show. And we'll have some really good examples of this, I think, later about consistency paying dividends, both in your design time, because making UI takes time, and also in the ability of the user to pick up your game quick and fast and be more about playing your game rather than trying to learn an interface. So, designing layouts that work. Kind of building off of what we just talked about, what kind of game are you making? That matters way more than any of this stuff we're going to talk about UI first. This is the first thing I think anyone making a game, when they're thinking about it in the context of the UI, that's going to make all the difference. What are the game mechanics? Is it a shooting kind of game? Is it a tycoon? Is it a simulator? Is it something different? Those are all going to make huge implications into how you want to lay out your UI, how much UI you're going to have. Maybe you have a game that doesn't have a lot. The talk before this, Defaultio, Lumber Tycoon 2, has almost no UI. So, that's obviously going to make a huge difference in how you're going to design what you're going to put on your screen. And the context matters a lot. Again, more examples later on this, but what is the most important action that your player wants to do right now? What's the second most important action? What's the action that you think should be most important? And, things like that. This slide here has a few different just games in Roblox, different UI kind of moments in time of those games. They all look pretty different, honestly. So you have something like Phantom Forces, great game. When you're playing the actual game, there's very minimal UI. That's because it's a first-person shooter and you're not really focused on clicking buttons or configuring something in your inventory or something like that. You can also have a game like Theme Park Tycoon 2 where most of the game is about clicking buttons and placing content in 3D because you have so many different, theme park accessories that you need to, configure and place around. So it's a lot of UI that you have to consider in that type of game. So I'll dive a little deeper with a case study of polygons. This is a game made by Mailbox Games. I'll be honest, I think I probably play this game way too much in the office. I love it. It's great. I don't know if you've played it. If you haven't, I definitely recommend checking it out. So we'll take a look at a few different screenshots of different moments in this game. A lot of it works really well. Any game has room for improvement, so we'll talk about some ideas that maybe would change things up, maybe make it clearer to the user as well. So this is the screen you're sort of greeted with when you join this game. It's pretty simple, which is good. You don't want to overload your player with a bunch of options right when you start the game from the get-go. There's kind of draws your eyes in the two corners of the screen there that I've highlighted, just simply because those buttons are a different color. That is good because you want to draw your player's attention to a particular thing to do first. There are things you could do differently here if you wanted to emphasize one option. Maybe one button is bigger. Maybe only one button is a different color. Thinking about, okay, what is the player's intent? It's the first time they're joining my game. What is the most important thing for them to do right now? This is another screenshot, kind of just a different sort of set of UI in that menu. This is the game configuration screen. It's really cool. I mean, the nice thing about this is right in the middle of the screen, you have some 3D content and shows you the gun. The gun is the important thing in this game, or in the screen. It's that you're configuring them. You have some graphs there that kind of show you the different stats. So when you're switching between guns, you can see, oh, okay, like this one does this better, this does this better, really quickly, really easily. It shows you how it looks, so that's something you might care about when you're playing. So I think generally this screen is, it conveys the information that it's trying to quickly and easily to the user. And finally, we have some of the kind of in-game, gameplay. So on the bottom right-hand screen, there's only a couple pieces of UI because, generally when you're playing this game, you're not trying to click a button. You might have some read-only information that you care about, but you're generally trying to find other players and shoot them. So that's like the user intent here. What else would you be worried about? The only other things that you care about generally in this situation is like your ammo, because that's in the moment information that you need, your health, your energy, things like that. And in the top left corner, you have a kill feed, which is useful because you can only see so much of the map at any given time. And especially in a team-based game like polygons can be, it's important to know what's going on around the whole map, to know like how your team's doing, if there's anything that you need to do to help them. Some things you could change about this that might make it simpler or better for the user. The ammo in the bottom right-hand corner works. You could potentially move it towards the middle of the screen where you're shooting, because then you have more info about, okay, that's where you're generally looking, is right in the middle of the screen, right? So if you don't have to move your eyes much, that makes it a lot easier to stay engaged in the action, but also keep a track on how much ammo you have left in your clip. So next topic, less is more. What does that really mean? There's a few different kind of things here. One action at a time is generally a good way to think about this. Limiting your players' options to be contextual really helps those users not be confused and overwhelmed with how much content there might be in your game. And with that, you can also use that to kind of reuse some of your design, which again alleviates the burden on yourself to design a ton of different elements, and makes it generally less confusing to your player. We'll jump into sort of another case study for this. Outside of Roblox, God of War from 2018. It's a really good game. There's a few caveats with this design I want to just kind of throw out there. I think it does a really good job at this sort of less is more, being contextual to the player, but it is a game that is only on PS4, which means it only works with gamepad, which, there's some aspects to that might not work if you're trying to make a cross-platform game, but the idea of a game that does a good job of reusing UI, reducing the amount that you need on screen at any given time, depending on what you're doing, it's great. So we'll jump in with some screenshots. First, we'll kind of go through some of the gameplay stuff here. If you're not familiar with God of War, first I recommend play it. It's good. This is a good game, and also it's, again, a great sort of inspiration for UI design, I'd say. So it's a fast-paced fast-paced type of game where you're doing a lot of melee combat, some ranged combat, those sorts of things. So the player, like Polygons, is focused on the action at hand in this situation. There's only a few UI elements on screen, and they're all useful. So at the top, you have a sort of navigation bar. God of War is also a mostly open world game, so the player can set objectives. So this is useful if you're fighting in a particular area, and maybe you get turned around, you're not really sure where you were going because you got ambushed, something like that. This is really useful because then you can orient yourself as a player to know where to go. And in the distance there, it might be hard. I didn't realize how small this was going to be. But there is a kind of like zombie creature that you're currently fighting, and it has a health bar above them, which lets you know, there can't be a lot of enemies in this game at once. It kind of lets the player mentally keep track of, okay, this person, I need to attack them or them. It's a good way to strategize. It's also an example of something called diegetic UI, which I'm a big fan of. Generally what that means is integrating your UI into the 3D content and world as much as you possibly can. This helps provide context to the player in a more associative way with what you're actually doing. And in the bottom right-hand corner, we have just a little bit of UI here. There's an NPC that you can control, at least in terms of shooting arrows. So that information can be useful. It lets you know how many are left. And then on the left-hand side, you have some health and other things that are directly associated with Kratos, the character you directly control in this game. And they're right next to him, too. So you know that's what it's for. It's, the context there makes a lot of sense. Here's another screenshot, similar to the last one, but there is some notable differences because it does a good job of being responsive to what the player cares about. At the top, there is no more navigation bar. This is because in this particular instance, the player has not determined a waypoint that they're going towards. They're just kind of roaming around the world. So there's not a lot of reason to have that there. So it disappears. Generally less UI you can have on screen for most games on Roblox or outside of Roblox even, the better. And in the bottom right-hand screen, or sorry, just I guess in the bottom, there is a little bit newer piece of UI that we didn't see in the last screen that lets you know if someone's attacking from behind you, which is just a nice way to design your UI. It's in 3D. It will rotate around the player's waist, letting you know, okay, there's someone behind me attacking. Obviously, it's a nice sort of hint when you only have a game that is available on a 2D screen. All right, so the other side of, God of War is the inventory. There's a lot of traditional RPG elements to this game. You can change out your weapons, your armor. There's a lot of skills you can upgrade, which generally means you're going to have a pretty complex UI, in this situation at least. This isn't always on the screen. They hide it behind a menu because it doesn't make sense to show this stuff all the time. There doesn't need to be a button to get to it immediately because it's not something you do all the time. It's something the player will probably do every once in a while, but not every 2 minutes or whatever. They do a few interesting things here. There's a tab across the top that separates it into the categories that make sense. This is good because otherwise there's just too much stuff to show at once, and they're sort of grouped in ways that make sense. So you got weapons and armor next to each other, and the other kind of groupings as they go down. Stuff on the left is more relevant to the player than stuff on the right because that's what is selected first. And also even just in this weapons screen, you see that there's I think press R3 to show description. They don't even show you all the info here. There's a lot more you can get, but they don't show it to you immediately because it's not necessarily the most relevant info. Some of that stuff only, someone who's really into customizing their character is gonna ever care about, so they hide it behind a button press. And then the next screenshot here is essentially the armor panel. It looks very, very similar to the last screen I was at. I'll go back just to show the comparison. Almost exactly the same. The character's turned around in this particular one, but everything else here is almost exactly the same. This is great for two reasons. One, as a developer, you don't have to design another piece of UI. This stuff, can take time. It takes time to refine it and play test it and make sure people understand it. Once you have something that works, you can reuse it, and the player will pick it up very, very quickly. That's the other benefit to it, too, is that you don't have to redesign it, and the player already knows how to use it, which is awesome. And then the last kind of piece of info here, I wasn't going to talk too much about graphic design because I am so far from a graphic designer, it's not even funny. But This is, I think, a really nice piece of visual information that you can encode into pickups or anything else in your game using color and shape. For this, these are two like different items you can pick up in the game itself. And by using color and then the shape of the icon, you know the rarity of something immediately without having to read text or find the number or do any sort of comparisons. All right, so with that in mind, we'll talk about kind of how you can use some of these things to build a responsive design. If you're not familiar with the term, it's essentially a way for you to build UI such that it can scale from anything from a tiny iPhone 4S up to something like an Xbox on a giant like 50-inch screen. Before we even get into that though, you know, why would you do this? Like generally, like what I just said, those devices that Roblox supports, we support all of those devices on the screen there, Xbox, phones, tablets, computers, even VR. So, okay, that's great, Ben. Like, yeah, I know Roblox is on all those places. But like, how many people are really playing on mobile or tablets? Like, is it not that much? Well, it's a lot. As you can see, this is the daily active user breakdown here. Essentially, it's like 2/3 of users are on either a phone, tablet, or console, and there's a third on desktop. So if you want to reach all the players that are on Roblox, it's super important to be able to just go ahead and kind of, you know, make your UI work across all those devices. Without going into too much detail, I'm just going to kind of post these here, just so everyone knows. You might already know this, but all these slides will be available for download. And I have some links at the end to useful like UI systems that we've built and some articles on the wiki and API references. And also a place I built, an example place that I'll show in a second here that you can download and try out and kind of mess around with and see how we built it. Anyway, these are just some interesting tips about different aspects of our UI system that I would recommend trying out and seeing if they're useful to you. So with that, this next example that I built in Studio here, this is just a screenshot, uses all those things, uses UI layouts, UI constraints, anchor points. There's no code running in this particular example, it's just UI objects. What you see here, I just whipped this up in basically an afternoon. It's kind of like a game browser or something. And this is kind of like the desktop example, how it looks on a desktop. If I use the emulator and turn it on to an iPhone 4S, it more or less works. You know, again, no code. I just clicked the emulator button, and this is how the UI reacted under the hood. So, you know, it scales down. You see a little less info in terms of words. You kind of have to, but it generally works. Same thing on a slightly bigger phone, and then a tablet. So those are, you know, it works for the most part. I mean, it depends on your UI, but like I think you can design your UI such that it will be responsive without having to write a lot of code. So that's only one side of it though, right? So how it reacts to your screen size, that's great, it works. What about input? Roblox supports all these inputs that are on the screen. You know, there's mouse, keyboard, there's touch, there's gamepad, there's VR. You want your user to be able to see it and also interact with it in a way that feels native and intuitive for all these types of input. So I have a couple of videos here of that same UI. Nothing's changed. It's still just you know, the code, the UI objects I've placed in the data model. Obviously, to use the buttons, you would need to write a little bit of code for a response for those. But in terms of navigating it, as you just saw, it was, you know, it scrolled around just fine. This is like sort of like the PC version. Here it is on a phone. You know, it works. You can you know, go up and down. You can go left and right with that. It all works under the hood, essentially inside of Roblox. And you know, it generally works. This is also on Xbox. Selection works out of the box. You can customize this if you so choose, but we do actually have a lot of code inside the Roblox engine that tries to select these intelligently for you. So generally, this can just work. All right, so almost out of time, so I'm going to go over a few UI features that we're working on. They're not out yet, but we are like just sort of working on them, and they'll be out soon. One is this inline layout. It's essentially just a flexible grid view. Something people have been asking for a while. There are some implementations in Lua I've seen, and this will be much more performant, and you don't have to write all that code yourself. So you get it for free. Something else that I don't really have a good picture for is automatic size. Something you guys might know this by is bottom-up sizing. Essentially, if you have a few fixed size objects and you want to fit them into a particular container and have that container scale with those objects, this does it for you. Again, I've seen a few Lua implementations of this, but we're going to be providing this out of the box.